Welcome to The Rally. This podcast includes commentary and conversations about issues relevant to clinical psychology. It is intended to educate, entertain, and enlighten, and is not a substitute for actual mental health treatment. Individuals who share personally here choose willingly to tell their stories to benefit you, the listener. All other references to clinical situations are altered or limited to protect confidentiality. For more specific questions or help with a personal situation, please consult a local mental health professional. Therapy, mental health, real life. This is Psych Rally with Los Angeles-based clinical psychologist Dr. Martin Hsia.
Welcome back. This is episode 4 of Psych Rally, brought to you by TZK Seminars, live webinars and home study videos for psychologists, social workers, and licensed counselors. The lowest price for live continuing education in the industry. Check out tzkseminars.com. All right. My good friend and colleague and fellow clinical psychologist, Dr. Nikki Frusakis.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for the time. This is going to be fun. We work together here at CBT SoCal. We're good friends, as you can tell. And again, she's a fellow clinical psychologist with a number of specialties, which include but are not limited to working with couples and social anxiety disorder, which is going to be one of our focuses today, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Nikki is often my comic relief. I enjoy having you here. We get to talk about everything from home improvement issues to married life to being children of immigrants. We still haven't agreed whether that makes your parents were born in Greece and you were born here. My parents were born both born in China, but came here from Hong Kong and Taiwan, and I was born here, so we don't know. We haven't agreed whether that makes us second generation or first generation.
I think it makes us first generation.
And see, I consider myself a second generation Chinese American, so one of us has to be right, one of us has to be wrong.
And typically I'm right, so.
Ouch. We're off to a bad start here. Perhaps most interestingly, I had debate about whether sharing this, but I just think it's funny because it's kind of embarrassing. But Nikki has this amazing superpower of bringing foul language out of my mouth. And I'm not someone who swears a lot or, uses a lot of four-letter languages, but four-letter words. But for some reason, I
think I bring out the best in people. And
the best language is the four-letter language that comes from me. That's amazing. So I don't know how you do that, and I know you take a lot of pride in that.
I do. It's humanizing.
We have fun together, put it that way. You are also relatively recently married.
I am.
Congratulations.
Just a few months. Thank you.
So let me ask you this, and we've talked about this all the time, but is it true, the saying from the film My Big Fat Greek Wedding, in your young marriage, that the man is the head of the household and the woman is the neck, which can turn the head any way she wants?
Absolutely.
That's true?
Yes.
And your husband would agree?
I don't know if he would agree.
Okay. Maybe he'll never listen to this, so we're good there. When you're not working here at CBT SoCal, you also work part-time in a research role.
I do.
With the VA, yeah.
Yeah, the Department of Veterans Affairs. I work at the hospital in Long Beach, California, and I'm involved in a variety of research there. Most sort of notably, I'm a project director in the Mental Illness Research Education and Clinical Center, whose focus is pretty much on severe mental illness like bipolar, schizophrenia, etc.
Right.
And we also focus a lot on families. And the role that we do at this particular VA, at this particular center at this VA, is to develop educational materials, whether that's for the veterans themselves or for family members or for people who would treat the veterans and their family members. So
gotcha. So for general educational purposes, both for people dealing with a specific issue, family members, or treatment providers such as us.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay.
Absolutely. And I'm also an assessor for PTSD on 2 clinical trials that are exploring treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder in our sort of younger conflict veterans, so OIF, OEF, New Dawn, and that are combat-related PTSD.
And can you say quickly what the nature of those treatments are?
Yeah, the Department of Defense funded study is about comparing the treatment of PTSD with prolonged exposure
Right.
versus, in just typical imaginal prolonged exposure, versus prolonged exposure that is enhanced with virtual reality technology.
Gotcha. That's right.
And that's the kind of primary focus on that. In addition, it's looking at whether a drug called dicycloceritin, DCS, is effective in sort of expediting the learning process associated with consolidating memories from the treatment. So some people get a placebo, some people actually get this DCS drug, which is basically an antibiotic that somewhere along the line, some awesome person figured out it actually helps with consolidating memory and learning.
So that will be given, as you said, to some folks, others will get a placebo, and
Right.
that's in interaction with either having a virtual reality component to the exposure therapy or not?
Correct.
Okay, so a number of variables.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
The other study is a cooperative study amongst different VA locations, and that one is comparing prolonged exposure versus cognitive processing therapy.
Gotcha.
These are the two sort of state-of-the-art treatments for PTSD that our field has to offer.
Used a lot in the VA.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Used a lot in the VA. And it's not the only treatments for PTSD, but it is sort of the premier ones. And we're comparing the two for combat PTSD.
Gotcha. And that's actually really interesting. A while back when I was doing my post-tech with a trauma recovery program at another VA hospital, that was one of the things that we sort of played with loosely in a treatment program, not with a heavy research component, but how do we determine which veterans were candidates for or would seem to benefit better from prolonged exposure therapy versus something like a cognitive processing therapy, which emphasized more the thoughts and the feelings. There was more of an educational piece on that
Absolutely.
front rather than prolonged exposure therapy was, I guess you could say the emphasis was on the exposure, both in vivo and imaginal in reprocessing in session.
Exactly. And hopefully this study will be able to answer which veteran would benefit more from one than the other.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming both are good.
Assuming both are good.
Real quickly, I know that your research lab at the VA recently came out with a resource that I think would be good to share with the audience.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for bringing that up. Actually, we have a YouTube channel called Mind Matters.
Okay.
And presently there's only some bits of information about bipolar disorder available. And the sort of lead in our lab, Dr. Nusha Niv, sort of takes you down and breaks it down. What is bipolar disorder, sort of causes, treatments, etc., how family members can participate. We really have come to understand the importance of family in playing a role in recovery from any mental health issue.
Sure.
And
it's a system.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So again, that's on YouTube. Mind Matters is the channel to check out for just kind of some really good, well-produced videos and resources. Currently with some resources on bipolar disorder, but more to come.
More to come, schizophrenia, etc.
And we're not going to see you in any of those videos, Nikki?
I like to be behind the cameras.
Okay, behind the scenes. But not in front of the mic today. Great. That's good. Okay, let's get back to those a couple get-to-know-you questions. So is there a particular book that you really find yourself recommending most often to your clients in your clinical practice?
Yeah, well, there's two. Okay. One relates more to my individual clients, and that is, the book is called The Reality Slap.
It's so funny because in episode 2, our other friend and colleague here, Dr. Jeanette Lance, recommended the same one.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah.
I am so happy she's familiar with that.
You guys are on the same page.
Totally on the same page. It's a book by Russ Harris.
Right.
And it's about acceptance and commitment therapy, as she may have shared, which is sort of the evolution of sort of CBT, so sort of the third wave in our practice. The other book that I recommend is a couples therapy related book, and I just absolutely love the way this woman writes and how she presents and her sort of take on relationships and attachment. It's a book called Hold Me Tight,
Right.
by Sue Johnson. She is the developer of emotions-focused couple therapy, and I think she just has a fantastic tone. You can sort of hear her Canadian undertone.
Well, but Canadian, but British.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I would enjoy hearing her talk about anything, even
Pretty
if it
much.
wasn't couples and attachment theory. Great. Okay.
She's fantastic.
She is. She's great, and it's a great theory and a powerful model for working with couples. Is there a particular work of art, film, show, book, sculpture, architecture that's really just left a stamp on your life?
The Walking Dead.
Oh, no. You didn't just go there.
I did.
I know we're going to go there later, but you didn't just go there already. Okay.
Oh, it is. It's just such a fantastic
Oh,
show.
boy.
Psychologists and everyone else just seem to love it, and so do I.
So do we. We happen to be psychologists, but we're also just normal people who, put ourselves in harm's way by watching that show. Okay, so more to come on that one. And is there any particular experience you've had in life or an event that really taught you a life lesson or left an impact that you'd be able to share with people listening?
Sure. I've shared this story before with some friends, and I think it really has helped carve from a young age how I look at the world. Sure. So I have two brothers, and they are 15 and 16 years older than me.
Yep.
I was a surprise, not a mistake. I'd like to clarify that. And my eldest brother was in college as a philosophy major when I was about 5 years old, trying
Pretty
to make
heavy.
sense of my world. And here's this guy.
Apparently he was too.
Right. And he lived at home and was going to school locally. So he stayed home. And I think in that time, he was all about trying to just understand the world and why and this and that. And so everything around my behavior became why. Nikki, why'd you do that? Why do you want this?
Why did you spill your milk?
Why did you spill your milk?
Why did you not clean up your toys?
Why do you want that toy?
Oh my gosh. Take it easy. Jeez, I'm 5 years old. Just let me be 5.
Right? But I think inadvertently, without him even realizing it, it created in me a curiosity about why. Why am I interested in this? Why are people interested in this? Why is this or that? And it was a genuine curiosity. It wasn't the why of judgment. It wasn't the why of why did you do it that way. Mm-hmm. It was more like,
I got
why?
questions.
I got questions.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Which lead to more questions.
Absolutely. So I think from a pretty young age, without realizing it, as pesty as it felt at that time and annoying to be drilled, it made me a little more introspective and curious.
Thoughtful about life.
Absolutely. And I think that has served me well.
The making of a psychologist. Does your brother even know?
He does.
He does. Okay.
I shared.
You've credited him.
It's a point of pride for him.
Oh,
yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Just like your point of pride is bringing foul language out of my mouth?
Absolutely.
Okay. So pay it forward. Gotcha. Okay. Great. Reflecting on life. That's what we do. And combining your responses on those two answers, we wanted to talk about, so Nikki and I share an affinity for the AMC hit show, The Walking Dead. And by the way, for anyone who has never watched the show or is not into it, this is my very brief summary of it. Summary of The Walking Dead. Kids kill kids. Kids kill other kids. Kids kill parents. Bodies get burned. Eyes get stabbed. Limbs get chopped off. People wrestle with their loyalties, with loss, how they value their own life, how they value other people's lives. Prison towers get blown up. Oh, and by the way, zombies have overrun the world and at any moment might sneak up and bite you or disembowel you. That's what the show is, and that's my description of the show. So now let me ask you this, Nikki, because I've never been a blood and guts, gore, horror movie kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. Me neither,
you
actually.
Neither.
Blood and guts, maybe. I grew up with a dad who loved action movies, and you certainly...
Action movies, okay.
You get a certain amount of blood and guts in that.
Sure, but I mean, to the degree and the kinds of stuff you see on The Walking Dead, that was never my thing.
No.
I was never a comic book kid.
No, me neither.
And I have to think, so you neither, and I have to think we're not alone there, because this show has amassed a huge following. Why...
And zombies and vampires
right.
and all that kind of stuff never appealed to me before.
So why would someone like you or me stay up late when we're busy people and have to wake up early in the morning, to put ourselves in harm's way and deal with the death and the violence and the blood and the guts and the fear, and then try to go to sleep after that.
And
why would we do that?
And I'll have nightmares, and yet I'll
You
still
will.
watch an episode the next day.
Right. Come back for more.
I do come back for more.
Positive reinforcement. Well, where's the positive reinforcement here?
Gosh, it is so good on so many layers. I mean, the stories are so compelling, and this search for who I am and who I will be in face of all this.
Mm-hmm. How are these people going to respond in the face of adversity?
Absolutely.
Literally life and death all the time.
Literally life and death.
Yeah.
Exactly. It strips everyone down to sort of the basics and really makes you kind of root for the good in people, as well as the simplicity of how things are. As scary as how things are, and in a way how complicated things are, it's nice to know who's the bad guy and who's the good guy, but then that gets complicated later.
Right. Well, right and wrong, good and bad. Does that even exist anymore? Because you're rooting for these main, Sergeant Rick Grimes and his crew throughout the show, and they're the protagonists, so you're rooting for them. You think they're the good guys, but they do some stuff, preventatively killing people in their sleep, questionable acts on a moral level. But again, you root for them because they're the so quote unquote good guys who are really the bad guys. Obviously without giving away too many spoilers.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes the bad guy is from within. Sometimes from within the group. Sometimes it's you're the bad guy in a moment.
Sure.
But it's not entirely who you are. And there's definitely some clear bad guys.
Sure.
Who are out to kill the protagonists. Now, if we knew their bad story, would we have a more complicated view of them? Perhaps.
Probably, yeah. Well, and then some people come from other groups of survivors that you originally think of as bad guys, but then become integrated into the group that you're following as a spectator. So you start rooting for them too.
Absolutely.
And you get to know their story, and then they integrate into a new set of values and ways of doing things with the Rick Grimes gang.
Absolutely. One of the things that really intrigues me about the story is how people solve problems. Because some stuff is very clear, and then there's certain characters who play the challenging role, the devil's advocate, the perhaps the super ego, if you will. Where it's like, well, let's take the harder way out.
Sure.
Let's give this guy another chance. Let's see, he may have more complexity to him, and let's not kill him off right away, when it would be just so much easier if we just killed him off right away.
Sure.
And giving people another chance, sometimes that works in people's favor. Sometimes it doesn't.
Not. Well, and it brings me, as we were talking about veterans issues, and think of in a combat zone or in a situation of war, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys? I mean, you fight for yourself and the guy next to you to survive. But as we've seen in more recent periods of conflict, the calls are being made from someone in an office thousands of miles away, and you may not agree with that. And it puts you in weird moral dilemmas.
Absolutely.
And so it's a similar thing. I think you see those things in The Walking Dead, where it's like you said, I could kill someone, or I could not and try to preserve life, if you will, but not killing someone could result in them killing me.
Correct.
And I got to make that choice. Or killing someone that I care about that's next to me. Whew.
Heavy
stuff. The other thing is you talk about solving problems. I think that's interesting, is because each Rick Grimes and his group have a certain sort of set of values and ways that they do things. Then they come across different groups, someone called the Governor in one season. There's a place called Alexandria that shows up in season 6, I think. There's the Hilltop community. There's a very colorful character that we've yet to really get to know. At this point, it's the end of season 6. And there was the Terminus group, and then there was another group that I think Daryl is this character who's really popular with the ladies. That Daryl gets kind of kidnapped by, who have a certain way of deciding who gets to sleep where and who gets to eat what, and So I just think that's really interesting too, because, even in our normal, quote unquote, day-to-day lives, when you are part of a church or part of a practice or part of a company or part of any business, a sports team, a family, right? It's different personalities with different ideas and different ways of doing things. And how do you integrate together? This show is about doing all that, but with the constant threat of death and injury.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's constant integration and hierarchy reformation, and just like you would if your company merges with another, and the pending doom might be, am I going to get fired or not? Well, this one is, am I going to die or not?
Right.
Yeah.
Although there's been firings, if you will, or expulsions from groups.
Touche.
Without death. Yeah. So.
Right.
And I know it's a show, so we have to suspend disbelief. But I just think, among all the things, I mean, the PTSD, the trauma. I mean, as I said, we have visions and nightmares.
I have nightmares just watching the show. It is surprising how PTSD is not highlighted. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not highlighted in this show.
It's not, yes.
There are brief glimpses of it. I remember early on Glenn and Abby, I think had nightmares, and they sort of, that's a symptom of PTSD.
And there's sort of a traumatic grief episode for one of the main characters. Yeah.
Correct. And I think in season 6, there's one of the characters that's experiencing sort of those physiological symptoms, like the slowing down of time, feeling like you're kind of disconnected from the current experience.
Yeah.
But it's really not a focus.
No, it's not. Right. I think the focus seems to be on the characters and on the storyline. And I guess maybe it's just assumed that these people are all traumatized all the time, and
sure, and their
and still
hypervigilance is definitely adapted for. Like,
the
more hypervigilant you are, the more likely you are to, survive. And when they finally get to a place where they can get kind of comfortable, some of them have a harder time of letting that go, and that can be seen as trauma. But it's really not a focus at all.
No, it's not. Yeah, and I used to make the case with veteran clients that, the level of hypervigilance and being on guard that was adaptive in the war zone is no longer adaptive in civilian life. But for these folks, they're, well, I guess you could say they're in a war zone indefinitely.
They are definitely in a war zone.
Right. Wow. Yeah. So anyways, we could go on this show for forever.
It's
probably.
so good.
I'm sure we're not the only ones talking about it.
I highly recommend it.
We're
if
two
you
normal
haven't
people.
seen
We
it.
happen to be psychologists talking about the show. So get on it if you hadn't. We're right now through the end of season 6. Favorite character, by the way, Nikki?
Daryl.
Daryl.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
Well, why, in your words?
He's really a good guy.
He's a hardened
good guy.
Yeah.
He's had his history of trauma and still has managed to kind of stick to his values of loyalty and being caring, and I appreciate that in him. And he's not not hard on the eyes.
Yeah, that's well, I can't disagree with you there. Not my type, but that guy, he is not afraid of anything.
Seems
you got to give him that, yes. And I don't have to tell you who my favorite character is.
Daryl?
Nikki, I'm a skinny Asian guy with very limited Asian people in the media, so...
This is true,
That's
Glenn.
true. There's a character called Glenn. If you haven't seen it, he's a Korean American, played by Steven Yeun. That's right. And hey, you got to root for the Asian guy, right? So maybe they'll get a Greek guy in season 7.
Here's hoping.
There's hoping, yeah. So we'll shift gears a little bit because we wanted to talk about something that Nikki and I help a lot of people with here in our practice at CBT SoCal with social anxiety disorder. But I think for you, Nikki, you've really taken it to another level, developed a level of expertise, done some extra types of treatment, and developed a special interest in it. So say a little bit about kind of how that developed for you. And
very organically, actually.
Yeah.
I just got a few referrals, sort of younger in my practice for social anxiety, and really enjoyed working with folks who were struggling with this. And social anxiety, to say a little bit about what it is it's not just shyness or introversion. I think we can talk a little bit about the differentiation there. But it's basically when you are so concerned about judgment and humiliation in a social context that it begins to really interfere with life. Create problems in work or school or relationships, your ability to function, and create a lot of distress, emotional distress for you. So social anxiety disorder have, some folks have come in with that, and I enjoyed working with them. I think it was very rewarding work for a therapist to do.
Yeah, you can see tangible results.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it doesn't take that long to get there. Unfortunately, some problems just take a much longer.
Harder to deal with, yeah.
Absolutely. And I just have appreciated being part of the journey of someone feeling like they're really getting their life back, and because they have felt so limited and so immobilized by their anxiety that now they have all this freedom and options to, go engage their world. I mean, at the end of the day, we're social creatures.
For sure.
We want to be connected. Now, how many people we want to be connected with is sort of a matter of personality and whether you're more introverted or extroverted, I think.
That's where the variation is.
I think so.
Yeah. At least that's not a matter of better or worse, functional or not.
No, it's just a matter of preference and style or something. But so whether you prefer being around and feel connected when it's just a small group, or whether you want to be at the center of a large group, that's just a matter of personal preference and personality.
So this is a sense I have. Let me see if you agree with this and have any thoughts as to why this is. But social anxiety disorder seems to me that among the, for lack of a better term, labels or sort of diagnoses that we have in the anxiety categories, I sort of feel like it doesn't get the press or attention either in research or in media as much as something like OCD, which now has its own category, it's graduated, or panic disorder, right? And yet, I sort of feel like, for people who get diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, 99 times out of 100, there's a social anxiety component to that. And I feel like most people, most of us, can relate to not necessarily having the disorder, but to social anxiety at some level, whether or not we have had panic episodes before or OCD, if you will. So I'm just curious if you have a sense why that is, or if you resonate with that observation.
I do, but I'm not sure why. There's a reported 15 million Americans who struggle with social anxiety disorder. So this isn't just a couple of people here and there.
No, clearly not.
And that's according to NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health. So I'm not really sure why it doesn't get as much press. Maybe perhaps because the people who would give it press are hiding because they're too anxious to come out and talk about it.
Perhaps. Yeah. Well, I've been wondering, is it maybe, social anxiety, it's real easy to kind of write that off as not a legitimate disorder, or that that's such a broad and general manifestation or context for feeling anxious that it's hard to feel like that's its own category, even if it is within our DSM.
I can appreciate that, and I think that of all the millions of people in America, there is that 15 million that have it to the level where it is a disorder.
You call it a disorder, sure.
Whereas the rest of us might feel some social anxiety or shyness even in sort of different settings at different times. And that's relatively normal to be a little anxious from time to time when you're going to go on a first date with someone that you've had a really great connection with over the phone.
Thankfully I haven't had to do that in a long time. I hope I'm done.
On a job interview, pooping in public at work. That might make somebody a little anxious about consequences to that.
But I think it's interesting for people who are listening who maybe can relate to some aspects of social anxiety, whether they're diagnosable with a disorder or not, but to get a sense what that might look like. Maybe that can be normalizing. I mean, like say for me, I have this thing about in a movie theater or on a plane, I really like to be on the aisle. Because if I have to go to the bathroom, I don't, I have this discomfort with inconveniencing or stepping across someone or waking someone up on the plane, because some of those seats get pretty narrow. It hasn't resulted in me, wetting my pants or anything as an adult. But, could that be a flavor, or if someone relates to that, among a constellation of other symptoms, could that be part of a social anxiety
Absolutely.
Presentation? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the hallmark for what tips it into a disorder is that space where it turns into something that's really impacting my life.
Mm-hmm.
So we have problems and interference in our life, in our relationships, in not being able to achieve certain goals we want, and the associated emotional distress that comes with either having to force yourself to do it and sort of grinning and bearing it, or the sadness that comes from not being able to kind of follow through with what you want to be doing.
Sure. Now, you and one of our colleagues, Dr. Maltby, in our other office, once did some groups for social anxiety disorder. Can you say just a little bit about that?
Oh, that was so rewarding. Dr. Lauren Maltby and I worked together and conducted 2 group therapies over the course of a year. And the first group had, I can't remember, maybe something like 10 individuals. The second group had about 7.
Mm-hmm.
And we started the group off by just giving some education and tools about how to deal with social anxiety, what it is, how to understand what's happening in your mind and how you're talking to yourself and how that's contributing. And then actually getting folks to do exposure exercises. What that means is an exposure is you facing one of the things that scares you.
Which is the hardest thing to do.
Absolutely.
And yet the crux of treatment for most anxiety
Absolutely.
disorders. Yeah.
And the beauty of a group therapy is that the exposure is there even on day one. You have to show up and be part of a
That's
group
already
of
exposure
strangers.
just to show up. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Let alone to say something,
Right.
share in front of the group.
So when these 10 brave men and women show up to this first group, we try to put their mind at ease and give them some education about how this is so normal and everyone's on the same page. And then the next few days next few sessions we work on giving them tools for how to deal with all this anxiety, how to understand it, how to understand what they're saying to themselves and in their mind, because we know thoughts contribute to emotions, and how to kind of talk themselves off the ledge, if you will.
Sure.
And then we actually went and did exposure exercises out in the community.
As a group, from what I recall.
As a group, we
Yeah.
went to a coffee shop, we went to a market, we went to a restaurant/bar area, and had people do a variety of things. And because there was 2 of us for a group of 10,
Sure.
we were able to really customize the experience.
Right.
And so each person was working on what their specific issue is. So not all social anxiety looks alike.
For sure.
Some folks have it sort of very circumscribed to certain areas, and other people it's much more generalized. And usually folks come into treatment when there's lots of different areas.
A number of things that's kind of cornered them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But some people, don't mind telling the barista, hey, you got my coffee wrong. I asked for this, but you didn't do that. And other people are terrified. The inconvenience of asking for a correct drink,
Sure.
Which is what you paid for and
Right.
what you ordered. And so we had to work on that.
Well, and I would have to think, in a restaurant or bar setting, there's so many different minute elements of social anxiety that someone can have, and let alone that you can sort of encourage someone to confront, if you will. As you said, asking someone to correct a drink, at a bar, talking to a stranger.
Sitting alone at the bar.
Sitting alone and eating. What are people going to think about that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's really interesting to me about social anxiety disorder, and that I think also why elements of it pervade so many other things, is there's this piece of sort of mind reading.
Definitely.
I am worried about how I'm going to come across or be evaluated or be seen And the assumption is that it's going to be something negative.
And there's this confidence that this person is noticing me and they are thinking something bad.
Sure.
And they are judging me.
Right. And that's an intolerable feeling.
Absolutely.
That's attached with that idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm very sensitive to being rejected. I'm very sensitive to being judged and called out on. And so this is the worst fear.
This is also why it's so interesting is, we talk about we're our own best critics. We love to hate ourselves through other people sometimes, because so often, like you ask, I find in practice, right, was where you ask someone, well, what if the tables were turned? Like if you saw that some random person sitting by themselves at a restaurant, would you think less of them, or would you?
Yeah.
And then the person will say, no, not really. I think that they were just getting lunch or getting dinner by themselves. But yet, when the table gets turned on themselves, can't tolerate it. Other people must be thinking this way, even though I don't.
Such confidence in that. And I think what the exposure exercises help do is test that. It's a research
and hopefully debunk
experiment.
It. Yeah.
And hopefully debunk it. And if not, which sometimes the truth is that people might notice.
Sure.
And in fact, sometimes we encourage our clients to do things that would be noticed and looked at oddly to prove a point. And to do this, Dr. Lauren Maltby and I did jumping jacks at the Whole Foods cafeteria area.
I think I would have laughed at you guys if I saw that.
Right? And
Not in a negative way. That would be interesting to see.
But what are these people up to? Where are the cameras?
It depends on what section of Whole Foods, maybe.
And so right in the salad/soup area, we did some jumping jacks, and it wasn't so much that we debunked that people wouldn't look at us or have questions or give us the eye of
sort. Sure, because they probably did.
Right. I think what we proved was that I can handle it.
Sure.
Even if the worst outcome happened with the thing that I feared, I can handle it.
Sure.
It's not going to crush me. It's not going to obliterate me.
This is what we talk a lot about in the research of, it's not the bringing down of a fear, if you will. It's the experiencing of tolerating a fear that's realized.
Definitely.
So I think you illustrated that really well there. So did you get some funny looks at Whole Foods, by the way?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure. My eyes would have been one of them if I was there. Yeah, but that's okay.
I think we got mostly funny looks from our clients.
From the people you were working with.
Just aghast that we would do this.
You said an interesting quote to me once related to social anxiety, which was that, or maybe this was one of the things that you were teaching in the group, that the only person who can judge me really is me. Right?
Sure.
Don't remember that?
I don't remember.
It sounded good at the time.
Sounded really good. I want to buy that right now.
I don't know if you... Well,
I'll take ownership.
I got it from you, so take it back.
I think at the end of the day, it's my evaluation matters.
For sure.
And my ability to have some compassion for my own humanness, I think, matters.
Sure.
For the fact that I'm not perfect and,
You're pretty close.
Well, I am.
Yeah, right. For most people.
Not in the least bit.
You mentioned something earlier, Nikki, about social anxiety being different from shyness or introversion.
Yeah. So shyness and social anxiety and introversion are actually used synonymously sometimes, which is a mistake.
A little bit of a problem, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think that has created a wee bit of problem in the social pop culture and social media and trying to understand what exactly this is.
So let's set the record straight.
Okay.
Right here, right now.
Let's set the record straight, even though the field of psychology hasn't exactly set the record straight.
We're way ahead of the rest of our colleagues. The field at large. It starts here, folks.
It starts here. Okay. So here's my personal take then from my understanding. The personality trait of introvert/extrovert is separate from shyness, which on the end of its continuum is social anxiety.
And as you said earlier, I mean, extroversion or introversion is not good or bad. It's not one or the other is not a problem. Mm-mm. But social anxiety, when it becomes a disorder, by definition, it's problematic.
Sure. And I would say when shyness hits a tipping point that turns into social anxiety disorder.
Similar thing.
Right.
And by that point, it's a problem.
Agreed. And so I think, we all have a little bit of anxiety in social situations. Some of us feel a little more shy than others. And there's even, some confusion out there about, is shyness the trait? Or is introversion a trait or extroversion a trait? But I know extroverts like myself who in certain situations might feel a little shy or a little anxious about something.
For sure.
But it doesn't actually escalate to anything more, and I'm definitely an extrovert. And so I see shyness as sort of that low end of the continuum where, a kid might take a little while to feel a little comfortable. There is some concern about how I'm going to be viewed by others, and will there be some judgment there? But it's not interfering. And when we hit that level of interference is when we give it that clinical diagnosis.
Sure. Well, and as you said earlier too, even someone who tends to be more extroverted can even have moments of being shy.
Absolutely.
And we might not even, would we even call that anxiety? I mean, you put someone who thrives off being around others in a completely new situation where everybody else already knows each other, there might be some shyness.
And I think that's appropriate anxiety.
Sure.
I think that's kind of, I'm keeping an eye out. Where do I fit in? How do I jump into this and connect?
It's protective and adaptive.
I think it's appropriate.
Yeah. So I saw an interesting statistic which said that, right along with what we're talking about, that there was, I can't remember the methodology behind this, but for people who are diagnosed with social anxiety disorder, 85% were also deemed to be shy people. But by contrast, only 17% of people who were shy had social anxiety disorder or were diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. And that was interesting to me because in some ways I would have thought it might be the opposite. Because I can think of lots of clients who have come in for social anxiety disorder that, at least, in general, it would be hard for me to picture them as shy because maybe they're actually in settings where they've had to be pretty outgoing or actually are extroverted in other ways, but still have social anxiety disorder. It's no secret that there are people, athletes, performers who are in front of people all the time and do so in spite of having social anxiety disorder. So I just thought that was an interesting statistic that I thought might be flipped on its head.
And there's some other work put out by NIMH that suggests that shyness, some people do not describe themselves as shy and never have been shy, but they have developed a social anxiety disorder. Right. And I think that's fine. Wherever you jump onto this continuum, or when you were at 0 shyness / social anxiety, and then you went all the way to 100 on the other side, when now it's a disorder, I don't necessarily think that's separate. So I'm going to stick to my guns about that this is a continuum, and that it's not a problem when there's shyness, but it is a problem when it escalates. I'm
going to stick behind you and your guns too, because I don't want to be facing you with your guns pointing. Maybe last question for you, Nikki, is for anyone listening who maybe is dealing with social anxiety disorder in any form or fashion, is there anything that you'd want them to know or to hear?
Sure. First thing I would want to say is this is tough. This is so tough, and I'm so sorry that you actually have to be going through this experience. It is certainly challenging, and it can really limit one's life and create such emotional distress. The positive is that we know what it takes to help, and we know how to help. And I think that what I would encourage somebody to do is the very thing you don't want to do, and that is go face it.
Sure.
Going and facing it with some knowledge and some tools that, a therapist or a good self-help workbook might kind of offer you.
Going to therapy can be a way of facing it in and of itself.
In and of itself,
absolutely. Or dealing with it with a self-help book, what have you.
Showing up and meeting me on, that's calling me for the first time. You don't know me.
Right.
That could be definitely, terrifying. And what is this person going to think of me? And most people think that they're the worst case that ever was. So it's illuminating to find out, like, oh, this is fairly common.
Sure.
So I think I'd like to share that, this is so tough, and you're so brave for wanting to do something about it, and but making that first effort to get into a therapist's office and sit down with the person, share about how this is impacting your life, and really being open to learning the tools to get you to a place where you don't feel completely naked when you go to do these exposure experiences.
Sure.
And that's really where the money's at. That's what is going to help your body and your mind learn that, oh, this isn't all too bad.
Sure.
What was I worried about? Or, hey, you know what? That wasn't great, but I could totally handle it. And I feel like when you finally get that experience and your body has been there and having that visceral experience of I'm uncomfortable, I'm scared, but wait a second, this isn't so bad.
I'm okay.
And
I can do this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is no way to get better from this than without having to actually go
straight through it. Yeah.
And I think the therapist helps you get creative about how to do that. I also think that we humans are really, really creative at avoiding. And avoidance is the culprit.
Sure.
The more we avoid, the bigger the problem becomes.
Keeps it going and it can spread.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Period. End of story.
And that goes across anxiety disorders.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably across most psychiatric disorders, if you will, in some ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is most definitely a common theme amongst anxiety disorders.
For sure.
And social anxiety disorder is no exception. So I think when you go through that and you learn a new way of how to interact with your environment and interact with your anxiety, and you're facing it rather than avoiding it, and the therapist helps you notice the different little minute little idiosyncratic ways that you might be avoiding, that's where the payoff really is.
That's where the change happens, yeah. And probably the thing that I'll throw in too is that, people say, well, I have exposures. I exposure all the time on my job. I've got to, lead meetings or give presentations, so I'm having exposure all the time. And I think it's different when you go into it with the mindset of this is why I'm doing it. I'm doing it as an exposure versus feeling like, well, I'm just white-knuckling it and getting by in spite of my social anxiety. It's a shift in mindset. I'm doing this with intention, and I'm expecting to be anxious, and I'm doing it anyway. And I think there's power in there versus like, oh, I know I'm going to be anxious, and I'm dreading it, and I still do it, and I get by, and whew, the relief is getting out of it. I think it's a completely different mindset.
Completely different mindset. And that relief that comes after, like, okay, 5 more minutes, okay, 4 more minutes, okay, is the culprit.
Yes.
In part of this. So the different mindset and the ability to then reflect back after it's all said and done, like, this is what I expected to happen, but it didn't happen.
Sure.
Or it did, but it wasn't too bad.
But I survived.
And
it was
survived.
tolerable.
And having that ability to kind of reflect on that experience really makes a difference for really processing and letting your body consolidate what that learning is.
Sure.
So I think thank you for bringing that up. I think that really matters.
And thank you for your time and sharing your thoughts and expertise.
This has been fun. I appreciate it.
We got to do it again.
Let's do it.
Dr. Nikki Frasakis, thank you. And thank you for, being on a podcast can cause some social anxiety. And it wouldn't for you, though, of course, being an extroverted person, right?
I've definitely had a little bit of angst leading up to this, wondering if I'm going to do a good job.
I think this was great. I hope it's been helpful for someone listening, and we will catch you again. Thank you again to my guest, Dr. Nikki Frasakis, and that's all for now.
Thanks, Martin.
And that was Dr. Nikki Frasakis talking about social anxiety disorder. I mean, really, I think that's one of those things that we can all relate to on some level, right? And yet we don't talk about it that much. And but I'm open to hearing from you about what we discussed here. Any experiences of your own, social anxiety disorder or not? What does that look like? What's been helpful? Any other things you wish we would have covered? This makes me think of that speech class in 7th grade. Whew. Well, let me know what you think, and I will catch you on episode 5, along with my friend Lisa. She's going to be talking about her experiences in therapy, dealing with trauma, and a sermon gone a little bit wrong. See you there.